Valerie Langford is a 29-year-old judge in Chicago, celebrated for her ironclad integrity and no-nonsense approach in the courtroom. She has built a reputation as a fierce protector of justice, known for being hard on criminals, particularly in high-profile cases involving corruption and organized crime. Her colleagues respect her, and the media frequently praises her for being a strong, moral force in the legal world. Valerie lives with her husband, Daniel, a successful surgeon, and their two children, Emily, 17, and Michael, 15. The Langford family appears flawless, the epitome of success and privilege. They live in a lavish neighborhood, drive expensive cars, and are active members of elite social circles. The Langfords often attend charity galas and are featured in lifestyle magazines as an example of the perfect, successful family. However, beneath this pristine exterior, Valerie harbors a deep, dark secret. She craves control, not just in her professional life, but in her personal life as well. Valerie is a master manipulator, hiding her predatory instincts behind a mask of charm and professionalism. She thrives on power, and everything she does is a calculated move to maintain her control over those around her. She hides this dark side even from her family, who see her as the loving, dedicated matriarch of their home. But Valerie's true nature lurks just below the surface, waiting to emerge. The Langfords' family life is just as polished as Valerie's professional image. Daniel Langford is a highly regarded surgeon, deeply respected in his field. He is caring, supportive, and devoted to his family, especially to Valerie, whom he sees as the perfect wife and mother. They share a luxurious home in one of Chicago's most affluent neighborhoods, where their children, Emily and Michael, attend prestigious private schools. Emily is an ambitious high school senior with dreams of attending an Ivy League college. She is intelligent, responsible, and the quintessential golden child, excelling in academics and extracurricular activities. Michael, on the other hand, is a typical 15-year-old who is passionate about sports, particularly football. He idolizes his father and has a close bond with his family, although he doesn't always live up to the academic expectations that are placed on him. Despite this seemingly perfect family, Valerie's interactions with her loved ones are emotionally distant. To outsiders, she appears to be the perfect wife and mother, attending PTA meetings, organizing family vacations, and maintaining an active social life. However, in reality, she views her family as pawns in the larger game of control she's playing. Valerie manipulates her family dynamics to suit her image, using her role as a mother and wife to maintain the illusion of the ideal family. Her affection towards Daniel and the children is largely performative, hiding her deeper, darker nature. 5 years ago, Valerie's parents died in a tragic car accident, leaving a lasting emotional scar on her. This event was a pivotal moment in her life and triggered her descent into her dark, controlling tendencies. Valerie and her younger brother, Jason, were very close to their parents. When they died suddenly, Valerie felt an overwhelming need to step up and fill the void, not just for herself, but for Jason as well, who was only 23 at the time. Jason was devastated by their parents' death and became heavily reliant on Valerie for emotional and financial support. Valerie, already someone who craved control, found herself struggling with her own grief and the responsibility of taking care of her brother. Over the years, she found it increasingly difficult to manage her emotions and maintain control over her life. This loss also marked the beginning of Valerie's deeper, emotional detachment from those around her. Her desire to keep everything under control became more intense, but it also unleashed her darker impulses. Unable to fully grieve or process the trauma of losing her parents, Valerie's predatory instincts began to emerge. She became more manipulative in both her personal and professional life, seeking power in increasingly dangerous ways. Jason Langford, now 28, has struggled ever since their parents' death. While Valerie threw herself into her work and maintaining control over her life, Jason spiraled into addiction and self-destruction. He has been in and out of rehab for several years, unable to cope with his grief. Jason's relationship with Valerie is complicated. On one hand, he sees her as the only family he has left, but on the other hand, he feels the weight of her constant judgment and emotional distance. Valerie provides for Jason financially, paying for his rehab stints and bailing him out of trouble when necessary. But she does so out of a sense of duty rather than genuine care. Jason's dependence on her only strengthens her sense of control over him, but it also breeds resentment. Valerie sees Jason as weak and a failure, someone who has given into his emotions while she has mastered hers. To her, Jason's struggles represent everything she fears: losing control, being vulnerable, and failing to maintain her perfect image. Despite helping him, Valerie's interactions with Jason are cold and distant. She manipulates him, controlling every aspect of his life under the guise of being his supportive sister. Jason, in turn, feels both grateful and trapped by her, aware on some level that Valerie is using him to feed her need for dominance. He is a constant reminder of her failure to keep her emotions in check, and this dynamic only adds to the pressure Valerie feels in her already fragile world. While Valerie continues to maintain her public image as a respected judge and devoted mother, her private life is a stark contrast. At night, in the privacy of her luxurious home, she indulges in her darkest desires. Valerie has developed an obsession with control that manifests in increasingly dangerous ways. She seeks out risky, manipulative interactions with others, often using her power and influence to bend people to her will. She enjoys manipulating those around her, whether it's her colleagues in the legal field, the people she interacts with socially, or even her family members. Valerie thrives on watching people do her bidding without ever realizing they are being controlled. She takes pleasure in her ability to deceive, to appear perfect on the outside while harboring dark, predatory instincts. Valerie's manipulative tendencies also extend to her marriage. While Daniel remains devoted to her, unaware of her true nature, Valerie sees their relationship as just another aspect of her life she must control. She is emotionally detached from Daniel and uses her charm and intellect to keep him in the dark about her real desires. The same goes for her children. While she appears to be a loving mother, she is cold and calculating in her interactions with them, viewing them as tools to maintain her image. As Valerie's need for control intensifies, her private actions become riskier. She begins to take bigger chances, pushing the boundaries of her manipulative behavior. These actions slowly start to erode the perfect life she has built, but Valerie, blinded by her obsession with power, continues down this dangerous path, unaware of how close she is to losing everything. Detective Naomi Sinclair, a seasoned investigator in her mid-30s, has been assigned to a high-profile case involving a prominent businessman's murder. The case, filled with corruption and ties to organized crime, begins to intersect with Valerie Langford's professional life when evidence links one of the suspects to a high-profile case Valerie presided over in the past. Sinclair, known for her sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of justice, becomes suspicious of Valerie's role in the case. Sinclair is tough, no-nonsense, and driven by a deep sense of justice. Unlike Valerie, Sinclair doesn't wear a mask of charm or pretense. She is straightforward and unafraid to ask uncomfortable questions, the trait that makes her stand out in a male-dominated field. As Sinclair begins to investigate, she starts noticing inconsistencies in the records and behavior of key individuals connected to Valerie's past cases, including those from the time when she first became a judge. Sinclair's investigation into the businessman's murder takes on a dual purpose: uncover the criminal activities surrounding the murder, and eventually dig deeper into Valerie's own past. Her suspicion of Valerie grows as she begins to see signs of a much darker, hidden side to the judge. Sinclair's suspicion is not just about a single case. She senses that Valerie's involvement in the criminal underworld is more pervasive and dangerous than anyone realizes. As Detective Sinclair digs deeper into the case, she uncovers unsettling connections between Valerie Langford and several figures tied to organized crime. Valerie's career, long seen as above reproach, begins to look more and more like a carefully constructed facade. Sinclair finds evidence that Valerie has been involved in several high-profile cases where criminals have either walked free or received lenient sentences. Sinclair begins to suspect that Valerie might have been manipulating the judicial system, using her position as a judge to protect powerful criminals and ensure their continued freedom in exchange for favors. This discovery reveals the first true cracks in Valerie's otherwise perfect world. Valerie's supposed integrity was built on carefully controlled cases that allowed her to stay one step ahead of suspicion. What Sinclair uncovers suggests that Valerie has been using her power to further her own ambitions and to establish a vast network of influence that extends into the criminal underworld. Valerie's desire for control over every aspect of her life has pushed her to make dangerous alliances with corrupt businessmen, gangsters, and other criminal figures who could help her maintain her pristine reputation. The realization that Valerie has been involved in such dark activities forces Sinclair to consider the true extent of her corruption. Sinclair, though initially cautious, becomes increasingly determined to expose Valerie's role in these illegal dealings, knowing that doing so would be a major blow to the legal system's credibility. She feels torn between the desire to bring Valerie to justice and the risk of getting too close to someone so powerful. In this part of the story, Valerie's rise to power is explored more deeply. Valerie's ambition was never just about professional success. It was about securing absolute control over her life and the people around her. As a young woman, Valerie had to fight for every opportunity in the male-dominated legal field. She knew that in order to make her mark, she needed to outsmart and outperform her competitors at every turn. But as she gained more power, her ambitions shifted from professional success to personal dominance. Valerie realized early on that people could be manipulated by their desires, fears, and insecurities. She began to view everyone around her as potential pawns to be controlled. Her manipulative nature found fertile ground in the legal world, where people's fates were often determined by the judgments of a single person, the judge. Valerie's cleverness in exploiting these situations allowed her to climb the ranks quickly, but it also led her to make dangerous alliances with people who shared her desire for control. These alliances, especially with members of the criminal underworld, gave her access to immense power, money, resources, and influence. This desire for power and control became an obsession. She reveled in the ability to control people's destinies, whether it was keeping a criminal out of prison or ruining someone's career. Valerie's thirst for power was insatiable, and with each new case she manipulated, her grip on the legal system grew stronger. Her personal and professional lives were no longer separate. Everything, from her marriage to her career, was a strategic move in her grand plan to dominate. Valerie's perfectly controlled life begins to unravel as Detective Sinclair's investigation heats up. Sinclair's pursuit of justice and her growing suspicions about Valerie start to shake the foundations of Valerie's world. Despite her careful planning, Valerie cannot escape the increasing pressure on all fronts. Sinclair's investigation into Valerie's connections to organized crime begins to get more attention, and Valerie is forced to confront the possibility that her carefully constructed facade is about to collapse. Valerie's once flawless career begins to falter as Sinclair and other authorities start closing in on her. Her professional life becomes a battleground, with media attention, political pressures, and legal investigations threatening to expose her darkest secrets. The emotional toll begins to take its toll on Valerie, who finds herself struggling to maintain the control she so desperately craves. The people she once used as tools to maintain her power, including her colleagues, clients, and even her family, start to notice that something is wrong. Valerie's once unshakable confidence begins to crack as she realizes she may not be able to keep everything under control much longer. Her relationship with Daniel and her children begins to deteriorate. Daniel, who has always believed in Valerie's image of integrity, begins to suspect that there is more to her than meets the eye. Michael, her son, begins to rebel against his mother's emotionally distant nature, feeling the weight of the manipulation she has imposed on him. The cracks in Valerie's family life expose the fragility of the empire she has built, both professionally and personally. As the investigation continues, the pressure on Valerie intensifies. Sinclair, now fully aware of Valerie's deep ties to criminal networks, begins to close in on her, using her connections and evidence to force Valerie into a corner. Valerie, once confident and unassailable, is now faced with a web of lies and deceit she can no longer control. The investigation becomes more public, and Valerie's reputation begins to crumble. The walls begin to close in as Sinclair connects the dots between Valerie's manipulation of the legal system and her criminal affiliations. Valerie's carefully cultivated image as a champion of justice is shattered, and her power begins to wane. Her control over her colleagues, family, and the people she once influenced begins to fade as more and more people begin to see the real Valerie. This is the moment when Valerie's true character is exposed for the first time. The web of lies she has been weaving for years becomes too tangled to escape, and her dark secrets begin to surface. As the noose tightens around her, Valerie is forced to make difficult decisions. Will she try to escape the consequences of her actions, or will she face the fallout of her manipulations? The walls continue to close in on Valerie as Detective Sinclair's investigation goes public. The press picks up on the case, sensationalizing Valerie's connection to organized crime and her manipulation of the legal system. The media frenzy around Valerie's downfall is unprecedented, and her reputation as an upstanding judge is shattered. Public opinion shifts from admiration to outrage, as people begin to see her as a corrupt figure who used her position for personal gain. Valerie is forced to contend with the consequences of her actions, both professionally and personally. Her colleagues in the legal world begin to distance themselves from her, fearing that any association with Valerie could tarnish their own reputations. The legal community, once in awe of Valerie's brilliance and integrity, now turns against her. Some even begin to publicly call for her resignation, demanding that she be held accountable for her role in the criminal activities she is accused of. Valerie, once so careful in managing her image, finds herself unable to control the narrative anymore. This public exposure takes a deep emotional toll on Valerie, who had built her entire identity around being seen as a figure of justice and respect. As her personal and professional worlds implode, she becomes desperate to regain control, but the more she tries to fight back, the worse the situation becomes. Her marriage to Daniel is also on the rocks, as he becomes increasingly disillusioned with her. Their relationship, once based on mutual respect and admiration, is now strained beyond repair. The cracks in Valerie's family life become more apparent as her children, especially Michael, begin to withdraw from her. Valerie is no longer the powerful, untouchable figure she once was. She is now a public figure under intense scrutiny, with everyone watching her every move. Her ability to manipulate the media and public perception is no longer effective, and she realizes that she may have underestimated the consequences of her actions. In this part, Valerie's life spirals into chaos. The mounting pressure from the ongoing investigation, the media circus, and the increasing isolation from her peers and family takes a severe emotional toll. Valerie is now a far cry from the confident and composed judge she once was. The weight of her actions becomes overwhelming, and she begins to crack under the strain. Her carefully maintained facade of invincibility starts to crumble, revealing her vulnerabilities and fears. Her political and financial connections begin to unravel as well. Business partners, who had previously been eager to work with her, now distance themselves, afraid of being implicated in her corruption. Those who once relied on Valerie for their own power or success now realize they can no longer afford to be associated with her, leaving Valerie increasingly alone. Her influence is slipping away rapidly, and she's left to face the realization that her empire is collapsing. Even the criminal figures she once worked with begin to turn their backs on her, as they sense that her power is no longer a valuable asset to them. Valerie's role as a protector of criminals is exposed, and her allies in the underworld no longer see her as an essential player in their operations. They begin to distance themselves from her, seeing her as a liability rather than an asset. This part shows Valerie at her lowest point, grappling with the consequences of her ambition and manipulation. Her fall from grace is not just professional, it is deeply personal, affecting her relationships with her family and leaving her with nothing but the realization of how far she's fallen. One of the most poignant moments of Valerie's downfall comes when she has a confrontation with her husband, Daniel. After months of strain and tension in their relationship, Daniel finally confronts Valerie about her actions. He is no longer the supportive partner he once was, and the idealized version of their marriage that Valerie had carefully cultivated is shattered. Daniel expresses his anger and betrayal, unable to reconcile the woman he once loved with the corrupt figure she has become. For the first time, Valerie is forced to confront the reality of her actions. Her manipulation of those closest to her, her colleagues, her family, and her husband, is laid bare in this moment of raw honesty. Daniel accuses her of using him and their children as pawns in her quest for power, and Valerie realizes that her pursuit of control has cost her the one thing she valued most, her family. The emotional confrontation is a turning point for Valerie. While she tries to defend herself, her usual manipulative tactics no longer work on Daniel. The truth of her corruption and the damage she has done to her loved ones is too undeniable. Daniel's accusations force Valerie to acknowledge the depth of her fall and the cost of her ambitions. This confrontation is a turning point for Valerie, as she begins to understand that she can no longer control the people around her, nor can she deny the reality of her actions. Feeling cornered and desperate, Valerie attempts to salvage what she can of her life. She tries to use her last remaining connections to delay or derail the investigation, but her efforts are futile. She reaches out to former allies, but they, too, turn their backs on her, no longer willing to risk their own careers, and lives to help her. Valerie's desperation grows as the legal system closes in on her, and she begins to consider extreme measures to protect herself. She makes a final attempt to use her influence over certain high-profile figures to stop the investigation, but she finds that her power has diminished to the point where she has no real leverage. The people she once manipulated with ease are no longer intimidated by her, and they begin to expose the extent of her wrongdoing. This part shows Valerie's last-ditch efforts to regain control. It's a reflection of her inability to let go of her need for power and control, even when she's faced with the overwhelming reality that her empire is collapsing. Her desperate actions only make her more isolated, and she comes to realize that she cannot manipulate her way out of the consequences of her actions. The final part of the story brings Valerie face to face with the full consequences of her actions. The investigation culminates in criminal charges, and Valerie is forced to confront the damage she has caused, not just to her career, but to the people around her. Her family, colleagues, and former allies all turn against her, leaving her alone to face the fallout. Valerie's once promising future is now shattered beyond repair. In the courtroom, Valerie is forced to defend herself against the overwhelming evidence of her corruption. The public who once admired her now condemns her, and the legal system she once controlled is now the very system that holds her accountable. The trial is intense, and Valerie's every move is scrutinized. She is no longer the powerful figure who once held sway over the fate of others. Now, she is at the mercy of the very system she once manipulated. In the end, Valerie's fall from grace is complete. She is sentenced for her crimes, and the world that once admired her as a paragon of justice is left to reflect on the stark truth of her corruption. Valerie, stripped of everything she once held dear, must now face the consequences of her actions, knowing that she has lost everything: her career, her family, and her reputation. The story ends with Valerie's final reckoning, a moment of painful self-realization, as she grapples with the choices she made and the life she has destroyed in her quest for power and control. It's a sobering conclusion that shows the cost of ambition and the dangers of losing sight of one's moral compass.